June 1902. The gardens of Chatsworth bloom while inside. A duke counts debts. The Peak District estate holds 30,000 acres, 175 rooms, and a staff larger than most village populations. Marble staircases, carved ceilings that soar 40 feet, collections worth millions. Magnificent, undeniably. But beneath the grandeur lies infrastructure, invisible to guests. Boilers that devour coal daily, kitchens operating like factories, wages flowing out every week to 200 souls whose labor makes luxury possible. Then death duties at rates designed to break estates. World wars, economic collapse. The arithmetic becomes brutal. To preserve anything, the family must surrender privacy, invite strangers into bedrooms, monetize history itself. Can ancient bloodlines survive when forced to sell tickets to their own lives? Who truly paid the cost of being England's most powerful ducal family? And what does preservation demand when beauty becomes business? In 1908, Victor Christian William Cavendish became the 9th Duke of Devonshire. He was 35 years old. The inheritance was not what you might expect for England's wealthiest ducal family. His uncle, the 8th Duke, had died suddenly, and the title passed to Victor, a man who had planned a career in politics, not estate management. Victor was educated at Eton and Trinity College, Cambridge. He had served in Parliament since 1891, working quietly in committees, building alliances, mastering legislative detail. He preferred budget analysis to hunting parties. While other aristocrats chased society and sport, Victor studied finance and read agricultural reports. He was serious, methodical, uneasy with ceremony. The inheritance he received in 1908 was staggering in scope and complexity. Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, Bolton Abbey in Yorkshire, Lismore Castle in Ireland, Devonshire House in London's Piccadilly, one of the capital's grandest private residences, Hardwicke Hall, an Elizabethan jewel. Roughly 186,000 acres spread across England and Ireland. The properties alone represented generations of accumulated wealth and political power. But that was only part of what Victor inherited. The Cavendish family had wielded political influence for 3 centuries. They had produced prime ministers, cabinet ministers, and governors. They controlled parliamentary seats. Local magistracies and church livings fell under their patronage. The Duke of Devonshire was not merely wealthy. He was expected to lead, to govern, to maintain the Conservative Party's strength in the north, and to represent aristocratic interests as social and political pressures mounted. Victor understood numbers. The annual income from rents, farms, mines, and investments was substantial, reportedly exceeding £150,000, well over 20 million in today's currency. Yet annual expenditures ran nearly as high. Chatsworth alone required a staff of more than 120. Maintenance was constant. Taxes, though still modest by later standards, were climbing. Insurance, wages, coal, provisions, repairs, all demanded steady outlays. The estate ledgers showed a complex balance. Income was reliable, but so were costs. What made the Devonshire estate truly powerful was diversification. Rental income from tenant farms provided stability. Urban properties in places like Eastbourne generated steady returns as seaside resorts grew. Industrial holdings, shares in railways and mining operations yielded dividends. Political influence opened doors and shaped legislation. The family's art collection, one of England's finest, held paintings by Rembrandt, Van Dyck, and Holbein. The library at Chatsworth contained rare manuscripts and first editions. These were assets, but liquid only in crisis. Victor's predecessor had been a public figure, a statesman who served in multiple governments. Victor inherited that expectation along with the land. He was to represent the family in Lords, to host political gatherings, to maintain Chatsworth as a center of conservative influence. The house was a tool of power, a stage for carefully managed performance. Weekend parties brought ministers, industrialists, foreign dignitaries. Entertainment was politics by other means. Yet Victor also inherited debt. Not crushing, but present. The Eighth Duke's building projects and political entertaining had drawn down capital. Death duties, introduced in 1894 and rising with each budget, had taken roughly 8% of the estate's value. Markets were shifting. Agricultural rents, the traditional foundation of landed wealth, faced pressure from imported grain. Tenant farmers struggled. Some parcels stood vacant. Victor read the books carefully. The estate was magnificent. The estate was also a machine whose fuel costs were rising while revenue faced headwinds. He believed in duty and careful management. He would serve, as his ancestors had. But the question forming quietly in 1908 was one few aristocrats voiced aloud. Could even inherited wealth sustain this model indefinitely? Inheriting the title was one thing. Assembling the resources to sustain it was another. The estate demanded expertise Victor did not possess. To run an estate of this scale required more than title and inheritance. Victor needed specialists, managers who understood land, finance, law, and the intricate dance of aristocratic politics. The Devonshire estate was not a single property, but an empire spread across 3 countries, and it demanded organization that bordered on corporate. At the center stood the land agent, the estate's operational brain. Henry Currie held this position under Victor, managing tenant relations, negotiating leases, overseeing improvements, and reporting on yields. Currie worked from an estate office at Chatsworth with clerks who maintained ledgers tracking every farm, cottage, and commercial lease across the holdings. Rent collection alone required constant attention. Approximately 800 tenant families occupied Devonshire land. Each tenancy had terms, renewal dates, and obligations. Arrears had to be noted. Improvements required approval and funding. The house steward managed Chatsworth itself, coordinating staff, provisioning, and the logistics of entertaining. Political secretaries handled correspondence, scheduled meetings, and maintained the networks that kept the Duke visible in Parliament and influential in conservative circles. Legal advisors navigated property law, settlements, and the growing thicket of taxation and regulation. The geographic scope was formidable. Chatsworth anchored the Derbyshire holdings, roughly 30,000 acres of farmland, moorland, and forest. Bolton Abbey in Yorkshire added another 30,000 acres of grouse moors, farms, and the ruins that drew early tourists even then. Lismore Castle, in County Waterford, Ireland, sat on a further 15,000 acres. Hardwicke Hall, nearby in Derbyshire, required its own management. Devonshire House in London, while not acreage, represented enormous value, a Piccadilly mansion on land worth millions. Beyond these showpieces lay the economic arteries. The estate held shares in the Furness Railway. Mining rights in Derbyshire brought royalties from lead, limestone, and coal extraction. Urban properties in Eastbourne, a seaside resort the family had developed, generated steady rental income from shops, hotels, and middle-class villas. Investments in government bonds and industrial stocks diversified the portfolio further. This complexity required constant tending. Tenant farmers needed support in poor years, credit for seed and stock, and drainage or fencing improvements that maintained land productivity. Political entertaining was not leisure but investment. Weekend house parties at Chatsworth brought cabinet ministers, industrialists, and allies who shaped legislation on tariffs, taxation, and land reform. Every dinner was calculated. Every shooting party had a purpose. The model worked because diversification provided resilience. Agricultural rents might fall, but mining royalties held. A poor harvest hurt, but urban properties and industrial shares offset losses. Political influence opened legislative doors and secured favorable treatment in local disputes. The family's social position attracted advantageous marriages, business partnerships, and access to capital. Annual income, as noted, approached £150,000. Expenditures ran close behind. Chatsworth staff alone cost roughly £25,000 annually in wages. Maintenance, coal, provisions, taxes, insurance, and political entertaining consumed the rest. The Devonshire estates employed, directly and indirectly, thousands across England and Ireland. Village shops depended on estate wages. Local builders counted on maintenance contracts. The Cavendish family was an economy unto itself. The system appeared stable. Income met expense. Power generated opportunity. But running this machine daily demanded resources few outsiders comprehended. Step past the staterooms, and another world appears. Behind the gilded halls and drawing rooms where guests admired Gainsborough portraits and Sevres porcelain, Chatsworth operated as a small industrial town. The beauty visible to visitors rested on foundations of coal, steam, labor, and relentless organization. What guests experienced as effortless luxury was in fact carefully choreographed work performed by more than 120 staff who moved through a parallel architecture of service corridors, back stairs, and utilitarian spaces designed to keep them invisible. A typical day began before dawn. By 5 in the morning, scullery maids were already lighting fires in the kitchen ranges. Water had to be heated. Breakfast for family, guests, and staff required coordination across departments. Housemaids moved through bedrooms, emptying chamber pots, sweeping grates, and relaying fires so rooms would be warm when occupants woke. Footmen polished boots left outside bedroom doors the night before. In the laundry, women began soaking linens in copper vats. Outside, grooms fed horses and mucked stables. Gardeners inspected glasshouses where tropical plants and out-of-season vegetables grew under carefully regulated heat. The staff structure was rigidly hierarchical. At the top stood the house steward and housekeeper, figures of authority who coordinated departments and reported to the Duke or Duchess. Below them, the butler managed male indoor staff. Footmen, typically young men chosen partly for height and appearance, served at table, answered bells, and maintained public spaces. The head cook commanded the kitchen with sous chefs, kitchen maids, and scullery workers beneath. In female ranks, the lady's maid attended the Duchess personally. Housemaids, organized by seniority, cleaned and maintained bedrooms, corridors, and reception rooms. Laundresses, often the lowest paid, wrestled with mountains of sheets, towels, tablecloths, and clothing. Outdoor staff operated separately. Head gardeners supervised teams that maintained formal gardens, kitchen gardens, and the extensive glasshouse ranges. Gamekeepers managed the grouse moors and deer parks, crucial for the shooting parties that were both sport and political theater. Stable staff handled horses, carriages, and later motor cars. Foresters looked after timber. Estate carpenters, masons, and plumbers formed a maintenance crew that responded to constant small failures across a structure covering roughly 3 acres under roof. Wages reflected skill and responsibility. The house steward might earn £150 annually, a comfortable sum. A footman received roughly £30 to £40 plus room, board, and livery. Housemaids earned £12 to £20. Scullery maids, at the bottom, made perhaps £8 to £10 yearly. Many staff lived in, sleeping in attic rooms or basement quarters. Meals were provided in the servants' hall, a hierarchical space where upper servants dined separately from lower ranks. The system was paternalistic. Employment offered security and a defined place, but freedom was limited and privacy nearly non-existent. Physical infrastructure supported this human machinery. The heating plant in the basement burned roughly 12 tons of coal weekly during winter. Boilers circulated hot water through pipes to radiators in principal rooms. Coal arrived by the cartload, hauled from local mines, or delivered by rail. Storage cellars held provisions purchased in bulk. Wine cellars required constant temperature. Ice houses, packed each winter, kept perishables cool through summer. Water came from estate wells and springs, pumped to storage tanks and distributed through an internal plumbing system, rare for the era. Waste disposal involved cesspits and regular collection. Kitchens operated on factory scale. During house parties, feeding 30 to 50 guests plus staff required military logistics. Provisions came from estate farms when possible. Dairy products, vegetables, game, and beef were produced locally. Exotic ingredients, spices, French wines, and delicacies were ordered from London suppliers. The kitchen used multiple coal ranges, roasting spits, and specialized equipment for baking, confectionery, and sauce work. A separate scullery handled dishwashing. Plate rooms stored and polished silver. China pantries held sets numbering in the hundreds. The dual circulation system kept service invisible. Backstairs allowed maids to reach upper floors without using the grand staircase. Service corridors, narrow and plainly finished, ran behind staterooms. Staff entered through separate doors, used separate facilities, and were trained to withdraw or turn their faces when encountering family or guests in hallways. The goal was seamless performance. Fires appeared lit, baths drawn, meals served, all without visible effort. Seasonal rhythms intensified demands. The London season, roughly May through July, meant Devonshire House required full staffing, while Chatsworth ran with skeleton crews. August brought shooting parties to the Yorkshire moors. Autumn and winter returned focus to Chatsworth for political, entertaining, and Christmas. Each season demanded different provisioning, different staffing levels, and different preparations. Weekend house parties, sometimes monthly during autumn, required planning weeks ahead. Guest lists, menus, bedroom assignments, seating arrangements, entertainment, and shooting schedules all demanded coordination. The local economy depended on estate employment. Edensor, the estate village rebuilt by the 6th Duke, housed workers and their families in cottages maintained by the estate. Shops in nearby Bakewell counted on estate custom. Tradesmen, laundresses, who took in work, and seasonal laborers all drew income from Chatsworth's operations. When the Duke was in residence, money flowed. When the family traveled, the village quieted. Monthly operating costs for Chatsworth alone ran approximately £2,000 to £2,500. Wages formed the largest share. Coal, food, maintenance materials, and repairs consumed the rest. London season expenses added another layer. Political entertaining, with its elaborate dinners and careful hospitality, was investment disguised as leisure. Every expense had purpose. Remove one element, and the system faltered. The house was magnificent. The house was also a machine that demanded constant feeding. Victor understood this better than most aristocrats. He had studied the numbers. He knew the fragility beneath the grandeur. And he believed that spectacle alone could not justify this scale of consumption. The house was a machine, but the estate was meant to be more than spectacle. Victor believed the land itself could innovate, could demonstrate that old power could serve modern progress. Victor wanted more than tradition. He wanted the estate to justify its existence through service, not merely consume wealth. The question facing landed families in the early 20th century was stark. Could aristocratic privilege survive an age of democracy and mass politics? Victor's answer was measured reform. Improve tenant conditions, modernize agriculture, support political causes that balanced tradition with progress, and demonstrate that landed wealth could serve public good. The most visible expression of this philosophy was Edensor, the estate village rebuilt by Victor's predecessor in the 1832 and 1842. The 6th Duke had demolished the old village, which stood too close to Chatsworth and spoiled views from the house, and reconstructed it half a mile away on picturesque principles. Each cottage was designed individually in varying architectural styles, Tudor, Gothic, Italianate, creating a deliberately scenic composition. By Victor's time, Edensor housed roughly 80 families, most employed by the estate. Victor maintained the village as a model of paternalistic care. Rents were set below market rates. Cottages were kept in good repair at estate expense. The church, rebuilt in the 1862, received maintenance funds. A school educated workers' children without charge. A reading room provided books and newspapers. Medical care was available through an estate-employed doctor. Standards were high. Gardens had to be kept tidy. Behavior was monitored. But for working families, especially compared to conditions in industrial towns or other rural estates, Edensor offered security and dignity. Agricultural improvement was less visible but more consequential. Victor brought in experts to advise on drainage, crop rotation, and livestock breeding. Tenant farmers received subsidized lime and fertilizer to improve acidic moorland soils. Low-interest loans funded barn construction and equipment purchases. The estate experimented with new wheat and barley varieties. Demonstration plots tested methods that successful tenants could adopt. Results were documented and shared across the holdings. These improvements required capital. Drainage schemes alone cost thousands of pounds. But Victor viewed them as investment, not charity. Better yielding farms could pay rent reliably. Productive tenants stayed longer, reducing turnover costs. Scientific agriculture improved the estate's reputation and attracted higher quality farmers. The model was enlightened self-interest. Help tenants succeed so they could help the estate survive. Victor's political role extended this reformist impulse. In Parliament, he supported moderate causes. He backed educational reform, infrastructure investment, and gradual electoral expansion. He opposed radical land taxation, but accepted incremental change as necessary to preserve social stability. His political dinners at Chatsworth brought together industrialists, moderate conservatives, and liberal unionists who believed in managed progress rather than revolution or reaction. Cultural stewardship mattered to Victor as much as political influence. The Chatsworth collections, accumulated over generations, included old master paintings, classical sculptures, rare books, and decorative arts worth millions. Victor saw himself as custodian, not owner. He commissioned inventories and conservation work. He allowed scholars access for research. He opened the gardens to limited public visiting on certain days, an early step toward the tourism model that would later save the estate. Admission was controlled and free, a gesture of noblesse oblige. These initiatives carried costs. Village maintenance ran several £1,000s annually. Agricultural improvements required ongoing investment with returns measured in years. Political entertaining was expensive. Conservation work on art and architecture demanded specialist labor. The estate employed conservators, librarians, and archivists whose salaries added to the payroll without generating income. Victor believed the expense was justified. Landed families faced growing scrutiny and hostility. Critics attacked idle aristocrats as parasites. The Liberal government under Lloyd George proposed land taxes and reforms that threatened the entire model. Demonstrating responsible stewardship was political defense. If estates improved agriculture, housed workers decently, and preserved cultural heritage, they might retain legitimacy and survive political change. The tension was fundamental. Victor held progressive values but operated within a hierarchical system. He wanted to help tenants, but could not surrender control. He supported democratic reforms while defending hereditary privilege. He preserved art for posterity, but kept it in private hands. The contradictions were real and unresolved. Paternalism, however enlightened, was still paternalism. For a time, the balance held. Innovation offset some costs. Political influence secured favorable conditions. Agricultural improvements yielded better rents. The village demonstrated that aristocratic estates could be socially responsible. The estate looked permanent, its position secure through adaptation and service. Then the world shifted. By 1913, the Devonshire estate had reached a kind of equilibrium. The system worked. Income balanced expense, roughly. The house functioned as it had for generations. Staff knew their duties. Tenants paid rent. Political influence remained intact. On the surface, Chatsworth and its satellite properties appeared permanent, a settled order that would continue indefinitely. The social calendar followed tradition. The London season ran from May through July. Victor and his wife Evelyn maintained Devonshire House, entertaining politically and socially. Ministers came to dinner. Industrialists attended receptions. Garden parties brought society figures and useful contacts together. Each event was calibrated. Guest lists balanced political allies, family connections, and rising men worth cultivating. The Duchess managed arrangements with precision. Menus, flowers, seating, entertainment, all required careful thought. August meant Yorkshire. Bolton Abbey became the center of operations for grouse shooting. House parties brought 20 to 30 guests for week-long visits. Men shot grouse on the moors by day. Evenings featured elaborate dinners, card games, and political conversation. Women organized themselves separately, walking, visiting local sites, managing the social atmosphere. These gatherings were not leisure. They were work. Alliances formed over shooting. Deals were discussed in drawing rooms. Political strategy took shape around billiard tables. Autumn and winter returned focus to Chatsworth. Political entertaining intensified. Weekend parties brought ministers, backbenchers, and allies who shaped conservative positions on tariffs, Ireland, defense spending, and the growing suffrage question. Victor hosted carefully. He was not flamboyant like some aristocrats. Chatsworth's gatherings were smaller, more focused. 30 guests, not 60. Quality conversation over spectacle. But even restrained entertaining carried costs. A typical weekend house party required weeks of preparation. Guest bedrooms had to be assigned, considering rank, relationships, and rivalries. Menus were planned with the cook. Wine was selected from the cellars. Staff schedules were adjusted. Extra housemaids were brought in. Laundry prepared linens. Stables readied horses and carriages for those who wanted to ride. Gamekeepers organized shooting if the party fell during season. Entertainment? Perhaps a small concert, or theatrical reading, demanded rehearsal and setup. The family's daily life within this structure was privileged but constrained. Victor spent mornings with correspondence and estate business, land agent reports, political letters, financial reviews. Afternoons might include meetings with tenants, inspections of improvements, or political work. Evenings, when not entertaining, were quieter but still formal. Dinner required dressing. The rhythm was ordered and predictable. Costs remained substantial. Annual expenditures at Chatsworth still ran roughly £25,000. London season expenses added another $10,000 to $15,000. Travel, political contributions, charitable donations, and unexpected repairs layered on top. Total household and political expenses approached £50,000 yearly, roughly $7 million in today's currency. Farm and rental income, mining royalties, and investment dividends covered most of this. But margins were tightening. External pressures built gradually. The Liberal government under Asquith and Lloyd George had introduced the People's Budget in 1909, raising death duties and creating new land taxes. The political mood was shifting against landed wealth. Labor unrest grew in cities and industrial regions. Strikes became more frequent. Trade unions gained strength. The old deference that had smoothed aristocratic authority weakened. Agricultural rents faced continued pressure. Cheap grain from America and Argentina kept prices low. Some tenant farms struggled. Arrears appeared in the rent rolls. A few holdings stood vacant when tenants could not make it work. Victor provided support where possible, but he could not subsidize every struggling farm without draining capital. Staffing became more challenging. Young men and women had options their parents lacked. Factory work paid better than service for many positions. Urban life offered freedoms country estates could not match. Recruitment required more effort. Wages had to rise to compete. Turnover increased. The housekeeper complained that finding reliable housemaids took longer each year. Skilled positions, cooks, ladies' maids, were hardest to fill. Maintenance demands never ceased. Roofs needed periodic attention. Stonework required repointing. Plumbing, still relatively new, developed leaks and failures. Heating systems aged. Electrical installations, added in the 1,890 seconds, needed upgrades. Each repair was necessary but expensive. Deferred maintenance accumulated quietly, creating future liabilities. Political challenges mounted. Irish Home Rule consumed parliamentary time and conservative energy. Defense spending debates intensified as European tensions rose. Victor supported military preparedness but worried about costs. He saw the political landscape shifting. The aristocracy's automatic authority was questioned more openly. Radical voices in Parliament called for land redistribution. Even moderate liberals pushed reforms that threatened landed interests. Victor read the ledgers with growing concern. The balance still held, but it was fragile. A bad harvest, a market downturn, a major repair. Any shock could tip the equation. He began making small adjustments. Guest lists were trimmed slightly. London entertaining was reduced. Some planned improvements were postponed. Staff vacancies were not always filled immediately. These were subtle economizing moves, barely visible to outsiders but present in the accounts. The family noticed. Conversations turned more often to costs. Victor discussed finances with Evelyn more openly than his father had with his mother. They reviewed budgets together. They questioned expenditures. The ease that had characterized earlier decades was gone. Careful management replaced casual abundance. Yet the house still functioned. Fires burned in the hearths. Meals appeared on time. Guests were entertained. Political work continued. The estate looked stable to visitors. The illusion of permanence was strong. Chatsworth had stood for centuries. It would stand for centuries more. That was the assumption. But assumptions are not armor. The estate seemed eternal. It was not. In August of 1914, everything changed. August 1914. War. The declaration reached Chatsworth by telegram. Within weeks, the estate's young men began enlisting. Footmen, grooms, gardeners, gamekeepers, sons of tenant farmers. The initial wave went voluntarily, swept up in patriotic fervor, and promises the war would end by Christmas. By 1915, conscription pulled more. The estate staff shrank not through Victor's economizing, but through military necessity. Victor's son and heir, Edward, Marquess of Hartington, received a commission in the Coldstream Guards. He was 26, educated at Eton and Cambridge, trained for politics and estate management, not combat. By autumn 1914, he was in France. Letters came regularly at first. Descriptions of trench life, requests for comforts, assurances he was well. The family read them in the library at Chatsworth and tried to maintain normalcy. The estate shifted to wartime footing. Parts of Chatsworth were offered for military use. Convalescent soldiers occupied some wings. The grounds hosted training exercises. Gardens that once produced flowers grew vegetables. Shooting parties stopped. Political entertaining ceased. London season was cancelled. Devonshire House stood largely empty, maintained by a skeleton staff. Economic disruption came immediately. Rental income faltered as tenant farmers lost workers to conscription and struggled with labor shortages. Agricultural prices spiked initially, then became volatile and unpredictable. Some farms produced more, others less. Collection of rents required flexibility Victor had little room to grant. Industrial investments, railways, and mining companies faced wartime controls and uncertainty. Dividend payments thinned or stopped. Operating costs did not fall proportionally. The house still required heating, though fewer rooms were used. Remaining staff demanded wages, often higher wages as competition for labor intensified. Maintenance continued, though less rigorously. Insurance premiums rose, taxes climbed. The careful equilibrium of 1913 was gone. Expenditures exceeded income. Capital began to drain. The war ground on. Casualty lists appeared in newspapers. Families across Britain received telegrams. The Devonshire estate was not spared. Workers were killed at the Somme, at Passchendaele, in smaller actions that made no headlines. Each death struck the village. Edensor lost sons. The estate's tight community fractured under grief. In May of 1916, Edward fell. He was killed in action in Belgium, leading his men. The telegram arrived at Chatsworth. Victor and Evelyn received it in the same library where they had read his letters. The loss was intimate and institutional. They had lost their son. The estate had lost its heir. Victor was 63. His younger son, also named Victor, became heir, but he was not Edward. The succession shifted. Plans changed. The future Victor had envisioned, Edward managing the estate with modern ideas and political skill, vanished. Grief mixed with practical dread. Who would carry this forward? The war ended in November 1918. Relief was real, but the cost was staggering. Britain had mobilized total resources. National debt had exploded. The government needed revenue. The solution was taxation at levels previously unthinkable. The Finance Act of 1919 raised death duties sharply. Estates valued over £2 million faced rates approaching 40%. Subsequent adjustments pushed higher. By the early 1922s, the largest estates could face effective death duty rates of 50 to 60% when combined with other taxes. The landed aristocracy, already strained, faced systematic dismantling. Victor understood the arithmetic immediately. When he died, his estate would be valued. That valuation would include Chatsworth, the satellite properties, the art collections, the investments, everything. The total would likely exceed £5 million. Death duties could demand $2 to $3 million. The estate held land, buildings, and art, but limited liquid assets. To pay duties, his heirs would have to sell. The same pressure hit estates across Britain. Land sales began almost immediately after the war. The Great Dispersal started. Families that had held land for centuries put thousands of acres on the market to pay taxes or settle debts. Buyers were scarce. Agricultural depression meant land prices fell. What sold went cheap. What remained unsold became liability. Victor began planning. He consulted lawyers and accountants. The options were limited and grim. He could attempt to reduce the estate's taxable value by selling now, but that meant dismantling while alive what he had inherited intact. He could establish trusts to shelter some assets, but tax law limited effectiveness. He could hope to live long enough that steady income might rebuild reserves, but he was aging and income remained uncertain. He began selling, not Chatsworth itself, but peripheral holdings. Parcels of farmland in Yorkshire went to auction in 1920. Mining rights were sold to operating companies. Some urban properties in Eastbourne were disposed of. Each sale brought cash to cover operating deficits and build a fund for future duties. Each sale also reduced annual income and cut into the estate's productive base. Staff reductions accelerated. Men who returned from war found fewer positions available. The household at Chatsworth, once more than 120, fell below 80. Some departments closed entirely. Functions consolidated. Economies spread through every operation. The Duchess managed with fewer housemaids. The stables shrank. Gardens were simplified. Maintenance was triaged ruthlessly. Essential systems received attention. Cosmetic work waited. Unused wings were closed off. Unheated, gradually deteriorating. The village felt the contraction. Employment fell. Wages for those who remained were squeezed. Support for local institutions, the school, the church, the reading room, continued but at reduced levels. The paternalistic care that had defined Edensor weakened under financial pressure. Families who had depended on estate work for generations faced uncertainty. Physical decay set in. Roofs developed leaks that went unpatched. Stonework weathered without repair. Plaster cracked and was left. Heating systems aged and were nursed along rather than replaced. The house remained functional, but the margins were thin. A major failure, a collapsed roof section, a boiler breakdown, could trigger crisis. Victor also faced political shifts that made his position increasingly untenable. The rise of labor, the decline of liberal unionism, the fragmentation of the conservative coalition, all eroded aristocratic political influence. The House of Lords had been stripped of most power in 1911. The war accelerated social leveling. Deference declined sharply. The automatic authority landed families once wielded was gone. Victor's political entertaining, even if he could afford it, no longer delivered the same returns. Agricultural depression compounded the pressure. Grain prices collapsed after the war as global markets reopened. Tenant farmers struggled. Rents fell or went unpaid. Some holdings were abandoned. Land that had generated steady income for generations became burden. Victor subsidized some tenants to keep them working, draining capital further. Others he released from leases, accepting vacancy over perpetual arrears. By 1925, the estate existed in a state of managed decline. Income covered basic operations, but not repairs or improvements. Capital sales had slowed, but not stopped. The art collection remained largely intact, but Victor knew it represented the ultimate reserve. If crisis struck, paintings would sell. That thought was bitter. These were not investments. They were heritage, accumulated over centuries, held in trust for descendants. Selling them felt like failure. The numbers were unforgiving. Annual income had fallen to perhaps £90,000. Expenditures, even after severe cuts, ran $70,000 to $80,000. The gap narrowed, but survival required constant vigilance. One bad year could eliminate reserves. Victor read the ledgers and faced reality. He could keep Chatsworth standing. He could maintain basic operations, but restoring the estate to its pre-war state was impossible. The model was broken. The emotional weight was crushing. Victor had inherited an empire. He would pass on a fraction, burdened with debt and deferred maintenance. He had done his duty, managed carefully, made hard choices. It was not enough. Forces beyond his control, war, taxation, economic collapse, had shattered the system. Evelyn saw it too. They discussed options in quiet conversations. Could they hold on until the younger Victor was ready? Could they stabilize enough to prevent total collapse? There were no good answers, only degrees of loss. Selling land bought time, dismissing staff cut costs, but the house itself remained. Vast, cold, increasingly derelict. To save anything, everything would have to change. By 1930, the choice was stark. Continue draining capital until nothing remained, or do the unthinkable. Victor was 77. His younger son, now the 10th Duke after Victor's death in 1938, faced the same arithmetic with even less room to maneuver. The Great Depression had struck. Agricultural prices collapsed further. Rental income fell to near worthlessness. Investment dividends stopped. The estate hemorrhaged money monthly. The idea came from multiple sources. Some country houses had begun experimenting with limited public access. Longleat had opened in 1949. Woburn would follow. The model was tentative and controversial, but it offered a lifeline. Charge admission. Let strangers walk through staterooms. Convert privacy into product. For aristocratic families raised to guard their seclusion, the concept bordered on prostitution. But desperation has its own logic. The decision was made. Chatsworth would open to paying visitors. Preparations were extensive, but conducted on minimal budget. Routes through the house had to be planned. Which rooms to show? The staterooms, certainly. The painted hall, the sculpture gallery, the library, the great dining room, family quarters would remain closed. Privacy would be preserved where possible, even as its erosion became the estate's salvation. Physical modifications were necessary. Rope barriers were installed to guide flow and protect furnishings. Signs were commissioned explaining rooms and collections. A ticket booth was constructed near the entrance, utilitarian but unavoidable. Staff had to be retrained. Footmen who had served dinner became guides reciting prepared descriptions. Housemaids learned to answer questions about paintings and furniture. The housekeeper managed crowd control. The transformation was jarring for everyone involved. Admission was set at £half, roughly £12 in today's currency. Affordable, but not trivial. The house would open 3 days weekly during summer months, roughly May through September. Hours were limited. Visitor numbers would be capped to prevent overwhelming the staff or damaging the property. The approach was cautious, experimental. Opening day in 1932 carried real uncertainty. Would anyone come? Would people pay to see rooms that had been private for 3 centuries? The family waited nervously. By mid-morning, a queue had formed at the gates. Families from Derby and Sheffield, day trippers from Manchester, a few from farther afield. They paid their half-crowns and entered. Visitors moved through the prescribed route. They stood in the painted hall and looked up at Verrio's ceiling. They studied the Raphael cartoons in the sculpture gallery. They walked the library and marveled at the book collection. Some lingered, others moved quickly, conscious of those behind. Guides answered questions. Security watched carefully. The system functioned, awkwardly at first, then more smoothly as staff adjusted. The family was not present. They had retreated to private apartments, listening to footsteps echoing through corridors that had been theirs alone. The experience was profoundly strange. Their home had become a museum. Their possessions were now exhibits. The loss was emotional and immediate. but the admission fees accumulated. By day's end, the revenue was modest, but real. If sustained, it might cover basic operating costs. Visitor numbers grew through the 1,930 seconds. Word spread. Chatsworth became a destination. Regional newspapers wrote features. Guidebooks added entries. The curious, the educated, and families seeking entertainment came in increasing numbers. By 1938, annual visitors approached 50,000. Revenue reached several £1,000s yearly. Not enough to restore the estate, but enough to slow the bleeding. The conversion affected more than the house. Grounds required adaptation. Car parks were laid out in former meadows. Signage directed traffic. Public toilets were built. Discreet, but necessary. A tea room opened in converted estate buildings, serving refreshments at prices calculated to add profit. Gardens that once grew vegetables for the household now displayed ornamental plantings designed to impress visitors. The estate was becoming a staged experience, carefully managed to maximize appeal and revenue. Staff roles shifted fundamentally. Employment numbers had fallen during the Depression, but tourism created new positions. Ticket sellers, guides, groundskeepers focused on public areas, tea room workers, maintenance crews, handling visitorware. These were not servants in the traditional sense. They were hospitality and retail workers, a fundamental shift in identity and relationship to the family. Edensor and surrounding communities felt the change. Estate employment had contracted sharply. Now tourism offered alternatives. Local women found work in the tea room and gift shop. Men took positions in parking and maintenance. The economic base shifted from agriculture and estate service toward tourism. It was survival through adaptation. But the village culture changed. The old paternalism gave way to commercial relationships. Then came September 1939. War again. Tourism ceased almost immediately. Petrol rationing made leisure travel nearly impossible. Chatsworth, like many country houses, was requisitioned for military use. In 1939, Penrose College, a girls' boarding school from Wales, evacuated to Chatsworth for safety. The house became a school. Classrooms occupied staterooms. Dormitories filled bedrooms. The family retained a small apartment but ceded most of the house. The students brought life of a different kind. Young voices echoed in halls that had known only hushed adult conversation. Lessons proceeded in the painted hall. Sports occupied the grounds. The juxtaposition was surreal. A ducal palace functioning as a school. Ancestral portraits watching teenage girls study mathematics and Latin. The arrangement lasted through the war. The family navigated a strange coexistence. They lived in corners of their own house, passing students in corridors, hearing lessons through walls. Privacy had collapsed entirely, not through choice, but necessity. The rent from Penrose College helped cover costs, but it was modest. The war years were about endurance, not profit. Other estates took on different roles. Some became military hospitals. Others housed evacuees or served as headquarters for military units. Chatsworth's relatively benign occupation as a school was fortunate. Physical damage was minimal. The students and staff treated the property with care. When the war ended in 1945, Penrose returned to Wales. Chatsworth was returned to the family, largely intact, but worn from 6 years of institutional use. Post-war, the decision to reopen to tourism was immediate. The estate needed revenue desperately. The war had deferred maintenance further. Costs of restoration were prohibitive. Tourism was no longer experiment but necessity. Chatsworth reopened in 1946 with expanded hours and improved visitor facilities. Demand was strong. Post-war Britain craved leisure and escapism. Country house visits offered affordable culture and beauty in a nation still rationed and rebuilding. Visitor numbers climbed rapidly. By 1950, annual admissions exceeded 100,000. By 1960, they approached 300,000. Revenue grew proportionally. Admission prices rose with inflation. The tea room expanded. A gift shop opened, selling guidebooks, postcards, and estate-branded items. Each edition brought more income, but also more commercialization. The estate began hosting events, weddings in the gardens, corporate gatherings in selected rooms. Film crews arrived to shoot period dramas, paying location fees. Each use generated income, but also wore on the property and stretched the concept of what a ducal estate should be. The family wrestled with boundaries. What was acceptable commercial use? What crossed into exploitation? Physical infrastructure evolved continuously. Improved car parks were paved. Visitor centers were built to handle ticketing and orientation. Commercial kitchens replaced older facilities to serve larger crowds. Modern toilets, accessible pathways, and signage proliferated. Much of this was necessary and carefully designed to minimize visual impact, but the cumulative effect was transformation. Chatsworth was becoming a professionally managed tourist attraction, not a private home that occasionally admitted visitors. Staff grew to roughly 200 by the 1962, larger than the pre-war household but with entirely different functions. Guides, retail workers, groundskeepers, event coordinators, conservators, and administrators formed the workforce. The organizational structure resembled a business more than a household. Professional managers were hired. Marketing became systematic. The estate developed educational programs, special exhibitions, and seasonal events to drive repeat visits. The family's role evolved too. They remained owners and ultimate authorities, but daily management passed increasingly to professionals. The Duke and Duchess appeared at major events, hosted select visitors, and represented continuity with the past, but they could not run the operation themselves. Scale and complexity demanded expertise they did not possess. The transition from aristocratic household to heritage business was nearly complete. Revenue from tourism and commercial activities by the 1972 approached levels that genuinely stabilized the estate. Operating costs were covered. Major restoration projects became feasible. The copper roof, deteriorating for decades, was replaced section by section over years. Stonework was cleaned and repaired. Collections were conserved professionally. The house, which had edged toward ruin, was pulled back and maintained at high standards. The price was privacy and tradition. Chatsworth no longer functioned as a private home in any meaningful sense. Family apartments existed, but surrounded by public areas and commercial operations. The estate's purpose had fundamentally changed. Preservation, not habitation, was now the goal. Beauty was sustained by making it accessible and monetizing that access. Local impact was profound. Tourism became a major regional employer. Hotels, restaurants, and shops in Bakewell and nearby towns depended on Chatsworth visitors. The estate itself employed hundreds. The economic ecosystem that once centered on agriculture and traditional estate work now revolved around heritage tourism. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The war ended. The tourists returned in growing numbers. The estate survived, but as something new. The question became not whether Chatsworth would endure, but what exactly was being preserved and at what cost. By the 21st century, the estate Victor inherited no longer exists. What remains is something fundamentally different. Chatsworth today operates as Chatsworth House Trust, a registered charity established in 1981. The family retains ownership through complex legal structures, but daily management rests with professional executives. A chief executive oversees operations. Department heads manage conservation, visitor services, retail, events, and estates. The organizational chart resembles a corporation more than a household. Preservation has become a permanent profession. The estate employs specialist craftspeople full-time. Stone conservators work year-round on exterior facades, repointing mortar, replacing damaged blocks, cleaning pollution deposits. The work is meticulous and unending. A structure this size always has sections needing attention. Carpenters maintain historic joinery, replicating techniques from the 18th and 19th centuries. Plasterwork conservators repair ornamental ceilings using traditional methods and materials. Painting conservators clean and restore the collection, work measured in months per canvas. Major restoration projects carry costs that would have been unthinkable to Victor. The roof, copper installed in the 1822 and patched repeatedly, required complete replacement in sections during the 1992s and 2000s. Cost exceeded £1 million. Stonework on the south front underwent comprehensive cleaning and repair, another multi-year project exceeding £500,000. Each restoration is documented, photographed, and executed to museum standards. The house is treated as a national asset, not family property. Technology has been integrated carefully. Climate control systems regulate temperature and humidity in rooms holding sensitive art and furniture, protecting collections while remaining visually unobtrusive. Fire suppression has been upgraded with modern detection and sprinkler systems hidden in historic fabric. Security includes cameras, alarms, and motion sensors, monitored constantly. Visitor management uses computerized ticketing and crowd flow analysis. The marriage of 18th century architecture and 21st century systems requires constant negotiation between preservation and functionality. The current business model is diversified and sophisticated. Admission fees form the foundation. In recent years, annual visitors approach 600,000. Ticket prices have risen to roughly £30 for adults, generating substantial revenue but still insufficient to cover operating costs. Events add critical income. The estate hosts approximately 150 weddings annually, each paying fees for venue use, catering, and services. Corporate events, film shoots, and private functions bring additional revenue. Period dramas regularly use Chatsworth as a location, paying tens of thousands of pounds per production. Retail operations have expanded significantly. The gift shop offers books, estate-branded products, local crafts, and reproductions of items from the collection. The farm shop sells produce from estate operations and regional suppliers. A garden center markets plants, many propagated from Chatsworth's own stock. Catering extends beyond the original tea room to multiple restaurants and cafes serving hundreds of meals daily during peak season. Each commercial venture is designed to feel appropriate to the setting while maximizing profit. Staff numbers now exceed 400, far larger than Victor's household at its peak. The composition is entirely different. Conservators, curators, retail managers, chefs, event coordinators, gardeners, maintenance crews, security personnel, marketing staff, and administrators form the workforce. Traditional domestic service roles have vanished, replaced by hospitality and heritage management positions. Wages and employment practices follow modern standards. The paternalism of Edensor is gone, replaced by professional human resources management. The family's current role is carefully defined. The Duke and Duchess live in part of the house and participate in major decisions through the trust structure. They appear at events, greet important visitors, and represent historical continuity, but they do not manage operations. Professional expertise has replaced aristocratic oversight. The transition has been gradual but complete. What began as a family estate maintained by inherited wealth is now a heritage business sustained by commercial activity. The boundary between private and commercial has nearly dissolved. Most of the house is accessible to visitors. Family apartments occupy a small fraction of the total space. Even gardens once reserved for personal use are now public. Privacy exists in carefully guarded pockets, but the default is accessibility. The estate's purpose has shifted from serving a family to serving the public while preserving cultural heritage. The sustainability challenge persists. Operating costs for a property this size remain enormous. Annual expenditure on conservation, maintenance, staff, utilities, and administration runs into millions of pounds. Admission revenue alone does not cover this. Commercial activities, events, retail, and hospitality make up the difference. Charitable status provides some tax advantages, but the estate must continually generate income to survive. There is no endowment large enough to fund operations indefinitely. The model requires perpetual commercial activity. The preservation paradox is real and unresolved. Visitors are essential for revenue, but visitors cause wear. Foot traffic damages floors. Body heat and moisture affect climate. Handling and proximity risk collections. The challenge is maximizing access while minimizing harm. Solutions include protective barriers, climate monitoring, visitor caps, and regular rotation of sensitive items. Balance is delicate and constantly adjusted. What remains of Victor's original vision? The house stands, maintained to standards he could not have imagined. The art collection is largely intact, conserved professionally and displayed thoughtfully. The gardens thrive, managed with scientific rigor and open to hundreds of thousands annually. The estate still employs hundreds, though enrolls unrecognizable to Edwardian servants. Agricultural operations continue on reduced acreage, now emphasizing quality and sustainability over scale. What was lost? Privacy. Entirely. The sense of a lived-in home. Almost completely. The aristocratic political influence that justified the estate's existence vanished. The agricultural innovations Victor supported, superseded by mechanization and changing markets. The paternalistic care of Edensor, replaced by commercial employment relationships. The illusion that inherited wealth alone could sustain such places, shattered by taxation and economic reality. The estate serves now, where once it was served. That inversion is total. Victor's household existed to maintain family comfort and political influence. Today's Chatsworth exists to preserve cultural heritage and serve public interest. The shift required surrendering nearly everything except the physical structure and collections. Beauty survived by learning service. Tradition endured by embracing change. The lessons are uncomfortable but clear. Grand houses cannot survive as private residences at this scale. Taxation and operating costs make the model impossible. Survival demands transformation. Privacy must yield to public access. Tradition must accommodate commerce. Heritage must pay its way or vanish. Families who cannot accept this lose everything. Those who adapt preserve something, even as that something becomes fundamentally different from what their ancestors built. Who paid for Chatsworth? Workers who built it. Victor who managed it carefully. His heirs who sold land and opened gates. Taxpayers whose subsidies support charitable trusts. Visitors who pay admission. Brides and corporations who rent the venue. Filmmakers who pay location fees. The answer is everyone. The cost is never finished. Heritage demands perpetual investment, perpetual adaptation, perpetual compromise. How much does a ducal legacy cost today? Operating budgets in the millions annually. Constant vigilance against decay. Acceptance that what you preserve will not be what you inherited. The price of beauty is surrender. The cost of survival is transformation. The house stands today, stone walls gleaming after cleaning, gardens meticulously maintained, collections conserved to museum standards. Visitors photograph the painted hall, walk the sculpture gallery, admire the library. The estate looks permanent. It is not. It is a daily choice, a managed performance, a business model disguised as tradition. Chatsworth survived because it learned to serve. Power could not be inherited forever, but beauty, carefully tended and commercially packaged, might endure, not as it was, but as it must become. If you enjoy deep investigations into aristocratic estates and the families who struggled to preserve them, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments, which European estate should we explore next? The challenges these places faced, the choices their owners made, and the transformations required for survival reveal uncomfortable truths about heritage, wealth, and what we choose to preserve. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next investigation.